A police dog jumped over an airport counter, and what he was chasing changed the entire investigation. This isn't a story about a dog being disobedient or reckless. This is the story of how one rescue animal, written off by nearly everyone, made a split-second decision that saved lives and exposed a threat that was hiding in plain sight. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover what Scout detected that day, and why his handler, Detective Marcus Webb, had to choose between following protocol and trusting his dog when trusting him could cost him everything. This is the moment everything changed. Detective Marcus Webb hadn't slept properly in 4 months. Every night, he'd lie awake replaying the same moment over and over. Scout's alert at the warehouse on Maple Street. The false positive that nearly ended both their careers, the embarrassment, the doubt that had burrowed so deep into Marcus's chest that it felt like a physical weight. Scout sat beside him in the patrol car that morning, staring out the window with those intelligent brown eyes. Marcus glanced over at his partner and felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach. This dog had been his redemption once. A rescue animal that nobody wanted. A shepherd mix with anxiety issues, a traumatic past, and a temperament that most handlers would have rejected immediately. But Marcus had seen something in Scout that others missed. He'd spent 8 months training him, rebuilding his confidence, teaching him to trust again. And for 3 years, Scout had been flawless. A detection dog with a 98% accuracy rate. The kind of partner that made Marcus proud to wear the badge. Then came Maple Street. Scout had alerted to a suspicious package in an abandoned warehouse. Marcus had called it in. The entire block had been evacuated. The bomb squad had arrived. They'd suited up. They'd gone in with their equipment. And they'd found nothing. No explosives, no drugs, no contraband, nothing. Just Scout's mistake. The internal review had been brutal. Marcus had defended his dog fiercely, but the doubt had already taken root. In the eyes of his supervisors, Scout was now a liability. One false positive could destroy public confidence in K-9 units across the entire department. One more mistake, and Scout would be retired. Permanently, and Marcus would be reassigned. This morning felt different, though. There was something electric in the air, a tension that Marcus couldn't quite name. Scout seemed to feel it too. His ears were alert, his body was tense. The usual calm that defined their morning routine was gone, replaced by something that felt almost like anticipation. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, reaching over to scratch behind Scout's ears. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he was talking to Scout or to himself. They were heading to Denver International Airport for a routine sweep. Standard protocol, nothing unusual. Just another day of detection work that would hopefully prove that Scout was still reliable, that Marcus hadn't made a catastrophic mistake in trusting a rescue dog with such a critical job. But as Marcus pulled into the airport parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that today wasn't going to be routine. Scout's entire body was vibrating with energy. Marcus's grip tightened on the leash. He'd learned to read Scout's signals, the subtle shifts in body language that indicated what his dog was sensing. Excitement, anticipation, focus. But there was something else underneath it all. Something that made Marcus's instincts scream that this day was going to be different. The question was, would it be different in a good way? Or would it be the moment that destroyed everything Marcus had worked for? As they stepped out of the car and headed toward the terminal entrance, Marcus realized he was holding his breath. Scout had one more chance to prove himself. One more opportunity to show that the false positive on Maple Street had been an anomaly, not a pattern. One more shot at redemption. Marcus had no idea that in the next 30 minutes, Scout would make a decision that would either vindicate him completely or destroy his career forever. The terminal was crowded for a Tuesday morning. Travelers rushed past with rolling luggage, families clustered around departure boards. The usual chaos of an airport in motion surrounded Marcus and Scout as they began their routine sweep. Marcus had done this 100 times. He knew the protocol by heart. Start at the east entrance. Work systematically through the ticketing area. Move into the baggage claim sections. Check the security checkpoints. Cover the concourses. It was methodical, predictable, safe. Scout, however, seemed to have other plans. Within the first 5 minutes, Scout's behavior shifted dramatically. His nose was working overtime, his head swiveling as he tracked something invisible to everyone else. Marcus could feel the tension radiating through the leash. This wasn't the calm, controlled detection work that Scout typically performed. This was something more urgent. "What is it, buddy?" Marcus murmured, trying to keep his voice steady and professional. Around them, travelers moved obliviously through the terminal. Nobody noticed the dog. Nobody understood what was happening. But Marcus was beginning to understand, and it terrified him. Scout was locked onto something. A scent, a presence, a threat that only he could detect. His entire body language had changed. His ears were pinned forward. His muscles were coiled like springs. Every ounce of his attention was focused on something that pulled him deeper into the terminal, away from the routine sweep pattern that Marcus had planned. Marcus's heart began to race. This was exactly what he'd been dreading. Scout was about to alert to something, and Marcus had to make a choice. Trust his dog, or dismiss this as another false positive in the making. The doubt crept in like poison. What if Scout was wrong again? What if this was Maple Street all over again? What if Marcus called this in and the entire airport security apparatus mobilized for nothing? The embarrassment would be career-ending. Not just a reassignment this time, complete dismissal from the K-9 unit. Maybe even the department. But what if Scout was right? What if there actually was a threat, and Marcus ignored his dog's instincts because he was too afraid of being wrong? Scout pulled harder on the leash, his desperation mounting with each passing second. They were moving through the ticketing area now, weaving between travelers, drawing curious glances from people who recognized the police uniform and the detection dog. Some people smiled. Some people moved out of the way. Nobody suspected that something was wrong. Marcus's palms were sweating. His mouth was dry. Every second that Scout obsessed over this invisible threat, Marcus's anxiety climbed higher and higher. The pressure was building like a storm cloud, and Marcus was caught directly in the center of it. This was the moment that would define everything. Not just Scout's future, but Marcus's future too. His reputation, his credibility, his career. Scout reached the ticketing counter area, and his behavior became completely frenzied. He was no longer walking. He was pulling, straining against the leash, with a desperation that Marcus had never seen before. His nose was working frantically, tracking something that seemed to be coming from behind the counter itself. Marcus could feel every eye in the vicinity turning toward them now. A TSA officer was watching with interest. A ticket agent had paused mid-transaction. A security guard was starting to move in their direction, probably wondering if there was a problem. Scout wasn't done yet. The dog's intensity was reaching a fever pitch. Whatever he detected, it was close. It was real. And Scout knew that he was running out of time to alert his handler to the danger. Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. In the next few seconds, he would either validate Scout's instincts or dismiss them. He would either trust his dog or doubt him. And the consequences of that choice would echo far beyond this moment. Scout did something he'd never done before. In all his years of training, in all his months working alongside Marcus, Scout had always followed protocol. He would alert by sitting, by pawing, by making eye contact with his handler. He would wait for Marcus to investigate, to call it in, to take control of the situation. It was the foundation of everything they'd been taught, the bedrock of their partnership. But Scout wasn't waiting anymore. The dog's desperation had reached a crescendo that Marcus could feel vibrating through the leash. Scout's entire body was trembling with an intensity that bordered on panic. His nose was working so frantically that his breathing had become rapid and shallow. His eyes were locked on something behind that counter, something invisible to everyone else in the terminal, but absolutely real to him. Marcus had seen Scout focused before. He'd seen his dog lock onto a scent and work it methodically, professionally, with the calm confidence of a trained detection animal. But this was different. This was primal. This was the kind of urgency that only came when a dog understood that something catastrophic was about to happen. Scout's muscles tensed. His back legs coiled beneath him like compressed springs. Marcus could read the intention in every line of his dog's body, and his heart lurched with the realization of what Scout was about to do. "Scout, no," Marcus started to say, but it was already too late. With a sudden explosive surge of energy that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his core, Scout lunged forward. Not at a person. Scout had been trained never to bite, never to attack humans, but at the counter itself. His front paws left the ground. His body arced through the air in a movement that defied every training principle Marcus had instilled in him over the past 3 years. The leash snapped tight, with a force that nearly wrenched Marcus's arm from its socket as Scout launched himself over the ticketing counter with the desperation of a dog who understood that time had run out. The terminal erupted into chaos. People screamed, high-pitched, panicked shrieks that echoed off the polished floors and vaulted ceilings. A mother grabbed her child and pulled him backward. A businessman dropped his briefcase and stumbled away. The ticket agent behind the counter, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, let out a cry of terror and stumbled backward, knocking over a computer monitor in her haste to get away from the dog. The TSA officer who'd been watching from across the ticketing area rushed forward, hand moving toward his radio with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to respond to security threats. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched with the certainty that he was witnessing a K9 unit malfunction. "We have a situation at the East ticketing counter." The officer was already shouting into his radio. "K9 unit, possible aggression, requesting immediate backup." Marcus was yanked forward, his professional composure shattering like glass as he tried to process what had just happened. His legs moved almost of their own accord, carrying him forward as Scout's momentum pulled him toward the counter. He could feel the eyes of 100 travelers on him now, could feel the weight of their fear and confusion and judgment. Scout had jumped the counter. Scout had broken protocol. Scout had done the one thing that could be interpreted as aggression, as unpredictability, as proof that he was dangerous and unreliable. In that single moment, Scout had just destroyed any remaining credibility he had with the department. Marcus could already see the headlines in his mind, could picture the news coverage that would follow. Police K9. Attacks airport staff. Detection dog loses control at Denver International. Questions raised about K9 unit safety and reliability. The Internal Review Board would have a field day. The media would crucify them. And Scout would be euthanized. There was no coming back from this. Not in the current climate, not with the scrutiny that K9 units were already facing. One incident of a dog jumping a counter, one moment of apparent aggression, and it would all be over. This was it. The end. The final nail in the coffin. But Scout wasn't attacking anyone. The dog had landed on the other side of the counter with surprising grace for an animal moving with such desperation. His paws skittered briefly on the polished surface before he found purchase and began moving with laser-focused intensity toward a specific location. A maintenance closet that was partially hidden behind the ticketing area, tucked into a corner that most people would never notice. His nose was working overtime, his nostrils flaring as he processed the scent that had consumed his entire focus. His body language was screaming urgency with every fiber of his being, his entire consciousness concentrated on something that only he could perceive. Marcus didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the counter after Scout, his mind reeling, his instincts overriding his fear and his doubt. If Scout was going to destroy his career, if this was going to be the moment that ended everything, then Marcus was going to be right there beside him. Whatever his dog had found, Marcus would see it through. They were partners. They were a team. And Marcus had learned long ago that the only way to rebuild trust was to take the leap of faith. The TSA officer was shouting now, calling for backup with increasing urgency. His hand was on his weapon, though he hadn't drawn it, not yet. The ticket agents were scrambling, some of them ducking behind their stations, others moving toward the exits. Security personnel were converging on their location from multiple directions, their radios crackling with urgent communication, their faces set with the grim determination of people trained to respond to threats. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He wasn't thinking about his career, or the review board, or the inevitable consequences of Scout's actions. He was focused entirely on Scout, on the desperation in his dog's movements, on the absolute certainty that Scout had detected something real. And Marcus had learned, in that moment, that trust wasn't about being certain of success. Trust was about choosing to believe in someone even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Scout reached the maintenance closet and began pawing frantically at the door. His whines were high-pitched and urgent, almost frantic. This wasn't the calm, controlled behavior of a detection dog completing his job. This wasn't the professional demeanor that Marcus had trained into him over countless hours in the training yard. This was raw, primal urgency. This was a dog who understood, on some deep and instinctive level, that lives were at stake, that time was running out, that something catastrophic was about to happen if Marcus didn't act immediately. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of security personnel, of travelers, of airport staff, all watching to see what he would do next. He could feel the fragile thread of his career hanging by a thread, ready to snap at any moment. But he also felt something else. The absolute certainty that Scout was right. Marcus reached for the closet door handle just as the first security guard arrived, shouting for him to step away from the dog. The guard was young, probably early 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that came from someone responding to an active threat without full information. "Stand down," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. "This is official police business. Step back." The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to follow the orders of a police detective or the protocols he'd been trained to follow. Those few seconds of hesitation were all Marcus needed. He yanked the closet door open. The darkness inside was absolute. The smell that poured out was acrid, chemical, wrong in a way that made Marcus's throat tighten immediately. Scout was still pawing at something in the darkness, still whining with that desperate urgency, still communicating with every ounce of his being that this was important. Marcus's hand found the light switch inside the closet. His fingers trembled as he flipped it. What he saw in that sudden flood of fluorescent light would change everything. The fluorescent light flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the small maintenance closet. What Marcus saw in those first few seconds would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. A moment that would define not just his career, but his entire understanding of trust, instinct, and the bond between a man and his dog. A man was slumped in the corner of the closet, his body twisted at an unnatural angle that suggested he'd collapsed rather than been placed there deliberately. He was unconscious, or worse. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made Marcus's stomach clench with dread. The man's breathing was shallow and irregular, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed dangerously unstable. His lips had a faint bluish tinge, and there was a thin line of spittle running from the corner of his mouth. He was wearing the distinctive uniform of airport maintenance staff, a blue shirt with a name tag that read David, which meant he was an employee, someone who worked here, someone who belonged in this closet. But it wasn't the man himself that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was what was scattered across the floor around him. Packages. Dozens of them. Small, neatly wrapped. Packages with the kind of professional packaging that Marcus recognized immediately from his years in law enforcement. The kind of packaging used for one thing and one thing only. Drugs. High-volume, high-value drugs. Each package was roughly the size of a brick, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with clear tape. The weight and density of them, visible even from a distance, suggested they were packed with something dense. Cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, something that had enough street value to warrant all of this. Marcus counted them quickly, his detective's mind cataloging every detail. 32 packages. Maybe 33. Each one probably worth thousands of dollars on the street. A shipment of this magnitude represented serious money, serious criminal enterprise, serious consequences for whoever was involved. But that wasn't what Scout had detected. Scout was focused on something else entirely. A device that was partially hidden beneath one of the packages, tucked into the corner where it might have gone unnoticed by casual inspection. A device with wires. Multiple wires in different colors, red, black, yellow, green, running from a central point to various components that Marcus couldn't fully identify. A device with a digital display that glowed an ominous red in the darkness of the closet. A device that was counting down. Marcus's eyes widened as the reality of what he was looking at crashed down on him like a physical force. The world seemed to tilt slightly, and for a moment, he had to grip the doorframe to keep from staggering. A bomb, not a hypothetical threat, not a false positive, not another Maple Street incident that would haunt him for years to come. A ghost that would whisper doubt in his ear every time Scout alerted to something. A real, actual, functioning explosive device with a timer that read 004723 and was steadily decreasing with mechanical precision. 47 minutes. That's how long they had. That's how long they had to evacuate thousands of people from an airport. That's how long they had to figure out what this device was, how it worked, and whether it could be disarmed. That's how long they had before something catastrophic happened. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos still unfolding in the terminal behind him. His mind was racing, processing information at lightning speed. The unconscious man, the drugs, the explosive device. It was all connected. It was all part of something much larger and much more sinister than a simple drug smuggling operation. This wasn't just a bust waiting to happen. This was a potential catastrophe. His hands were shaking. Marcus noticed it with a distant kind of awareness, as if he was observing himself from outside his own body. His palms were sweating. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The adrenaline was flooding his system, sharpening his senses while simultaneously making everything feel slightly unreal, like he was moving through a dream. Scout pressed against Marcus's leg, his body trembling with a mixture of relief and continued urgency. The dog had done his job. He'd alerted to the threat. He'd broken protocol because the situation demanded it. He'd trusted his instincts and forced Marcus to trust them too. And now it was Marcus's turn to do his job. Now it was time for Marcus to prove that he could handle this, that he could be trusted to make the right decisions under pressure. "Call it in," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He was speaking to the security guard who was still standing in the doorway, staring into the closet with an expression of absolute shock. The guard's face had gone pale, his mouth hanging open slightly as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. "Get the bomb squad. Get airport security. Get everyone. Tell them we have an active explosive device in the East Ticketing Area maintenance closet. Timer reads approximately 47 minutes. And we have an unconscious male on scene, possibly exposed to some kind of chemical agent. We need medical personnel standing by." The guard's face had gone completely white. For a moment, he seemed frozen, unable to process the information Marcus had just given him. His eyes were wide, his breathing shallow. Marcus could see the moment when the guard's training kicked in, when the shock gave way to professional action. The transformation was almost physical. His shoulders straightened, his expression hardened with determination. His hand moved to his radio with practiced efficiency. All units. This is Security Post 7, the guard said, his voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. "We have an active explosive device in the East Ticketing Area maintenance closet. Approximately 47-minute timer. Requesting immediate bomb squad response and full terminal evacuation. We also have a medical emergency. Unconscious male, possible chemical exposure. Medical personnel standing by." The response from dispatch was immediate and urgent. Multiple voices overlapping, units responding, protocols being activated. The guard continued relaying information as more security personnel began arriving, cordoning off the area, establishing a perimeter. Marcus turned his attention back to the device. He'd received basic bomb awareness training. Every police officer did. But he was no expert. The training had been designed to teach officers how to recognize potential explosive devices, how to secure scenes, and how to call in the professionals, not how to disarm bombs, not how to work with active timers. He knew enough to know that moving the device could trigger it. Some devices had pressure sensors, motion detectors, all sorts of fail-safes designed to prevent tampering. He knew enough to know that the timer was the only information they had about how much time remained. And he knew enough to know that 47 minutes in an airport full of thousands of people was both an eternity and no time at all. The unconscious man groaned softly, his body twitching slightly. His eyelids fluttered, revealing the whites of his eyes for just a moment before closing again. He was alive at least, still breathing, still fighting, even in unconsciousness. Marcus moved closer to him, checking for a pulse at his neck with 2 fingers. It was weak but present, thready and irregular, but definitely there. The man's breathing was shallow and irregular, which suggested he might have been exposed to something, a chemical, a gas, something that had rendered him unconscious and left him in this dangerous state. "What happened here?" Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Scout. "What the hell were you doing?" The packages were everywhere. Marcus counted them again, more carefully this time. 32, 33, 34. Each one was roughly the size of a brick, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with clear tape. The weight and density of them suggested they were packed with something dense, something valuable, something worth killing for. The street value of a shipment this size would be in the millions, maybe tens of millions, enough to motivate serious criminals to do serious things. But why the bomb? Why would someone build an explosive device and leave it in a maintenance closet with a drug shipment? It didn't make sense. It violated every principle of criminal logic that Marcus understood. Unless it wasn't about the drugs at all. Unless the bomb was the real objective, and the drugs were just cover. A distraction, a smokescreen designed to hide the real purpose of this device. Or unless someone had discovered the drugs and left the bomb as a trap. A booby trap designed to kill anyone who tried to move the shipment. Or unless this was something even more sinister, a statement, a message, a threat directed at the airport itself or at the government or at some specific target that Marcus couldn't yet identify. The possibilities were multiplying in Marcus's mind, each one more terrible than the last. A bomb in an airport, during the day, when thousands of people were present. The death toll could be catastrophic. The injuries could number in the hundreds. The psychological impact would ripple across the entire nation. And Scout had found it. Scout had detected something that every security measure in the airport had missed. Scout had broken protocol and jumped a counter because he understood, on some deep and instinctive level, that the normal rules didn't apply, that the situation demanded extraordinary action. Scout whined softly and pressed against Marcus's leg again. The dog was still on high alert, still focused, still communicating that something wasn't right. Marcus realized that Scout might not be done alerting. There might be more threats, more devices, more dangers lurking elsewhere in the terminal. Scout's behavior suggested that his alert was complete. He'd found what he was looking for. But there was still an underlying tension in his body that suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. "Good boy," Marcus whispered, reaching down to scratch behind Scout's ears despite the chaos surrounding them. His hand was shaking slightly, but he forced himself to maintain contact with the dog, to reinforce the behavior, to communicate that Scout had done exactly the right thing. "You did good, buddy. You did real good. You saved a lot of people today." The timer on the device read R45:18 and counting down. The terminal had descended into controlled panic. Airport security personnel were beginning to evacuate the east ticketing area, moving with the kind of urgency that came from understanding the severity of the situation. Travelers were being directed toward the exits by uniformed officers, their voices calm but insistent. The TSA was mobilizing, their personnel moving with practiced efficiency to secure the checkpoints and prevent anyone from entering the terminal. And somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of sirens, multiple sirens, growing louder with each passing second. The bomb squad, emergency services, the full weight of airport security responding to the threat that Scout had uncovered. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Captain Rodriguez. "What the hell is happening at the airport? I'm getting reports of an active explosive device. Please tell me you have information." Marcus quickly typed back with one hand while keeping the other on Scout's head. "Scout alerted to device in East Ticketing Maintenance Closet. Unconscious male on scene, appears to be airport maintenance staff. Multiple packages of suspected narcotics. Device has approximately 45-minute timer. Bomb squad en route. We're secure in closet awaiting specialized personnel. This is real, Captain. This is the real deal." The response came back almost immediately. "You did good. Stay calm. Bomb squad is 8 minutes out. Maintain scene security and keep civilians clear. This is going to be a long day. And Marcus, Scout just saved thousands of lives. Remember that. Marcus knew Rodriguez was right. This was going to be a long day. A very long day. And by the time it was over, everything would have changed. Scout's reputation would be rehabilitated. The doubt that had plagued Marcus for the past 4 months would be replaced with vindication. And the false positive on Maple Street would finally be put into perspective, not as a failure, but as a learning experience. A moment that had taught both Marcus and Scout to trust their instincts, even when the stakes seemed impossibly high. But first, they had to survive the next 45 minutes. The timer continued its relentless countdown. Grabber 44, 52, so 44, 51, so 44, 50. Each second that passed was a second closer to catastrophe. Each second was a second that the bomb squad was getting closer, but also a second that the device was getting closer to detonation. Marcus understood the mathematics of it, the race against time that was now unfolding. And he understood that his job, for the next 45 minutes, was to maintain the scene, keep Scout calm, and wait for the experts to arrive. Marcus positioned himself between Scout and the device, his hand resting on his service weapon, even though he knew a gun would be useless against what they were facing. A firearm couldn't disarm a bomb. A firearm couldn't stop a timer. A firearm couldn't prevent catastrophe. But it was comforting to have it there anyway. A symbol of his authority. A reminder that he was trained for emergencies, even if this emergency was far beyond his expertise. Scout sat beside him, his body tense and alert, his eyes never leaving the device. The dog's focus was absolute. His breathing was controlled and measured. His muscles were coiled and ready, prepared for anything that might happen. Scout was a professional, and he was acting like one. The dog had done his job. Now he was waiting for Marcus to do his. The unconscious man remained motionless in the corner, his fate uncertain, his role in all of this a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Who was he? How was he involved? Was he a victim or a perpetrator? Had he been forced to help transport the drugs and the device? Or was he part of the conspiracy? Marcus's detective's mind was already spinning theories, already trying to piece together the puzzle. But those questions would have to wait. For now, all that mattered was the device. All that mattered was the timer. All that mattered was making sure that no one else got hurt. And in the terminal beyond the closet, thousands of people were being evacuated, moving toward the exits with varying degrees of panic and confusion. Some understood the severity of the situation. Others thought it was a drill. Some were angry at the disruption. Others were terrified. But all of them were being moved to safety, away from the danger that Scout had identified, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. Unaware that a single dog, a dog that had been doubted and questioned and nearly destroyed by a single mistake, had just saved their lives. Unaware that the faith Marcus had maintained, despite everything, had been justified. The sirens grew louder, closer. The bomb squad was coming. The cavalry was on the way. And Marcus understood, in that moment, that Scout had given him something more valuable than vindication. Scout had given him redemption, not just for the dog, but for Marcus himself, for the faith he'd chosen to maintain when everything was telling him to doubt, for the decision to trust his partner when trust seemed foolish. Scout had been right all along, and Marcus had finally learned to trust. The timer continued counting down. 0:43, 45, 0:43, 44, 0:43, 43. 43 minutes remaining. 43 minutes to hold the line. 43 minutes to believe that the bomb squad would arrive in time. 43 minutes to prove that faith and trust and the bond between a man and his dog could overcome even the darkest threats. Marcus took a deep breath, centered himself, and waited. The minutes stretched out like taffy, each one feeling simultaneously like an eternity and a fraction of a second. Marcus stood in the maintenance closet, his body rigid with tension, his mind operating on multiple levels at once. On one level, he was the detective, cataloging evidence, processing information, trying to piece together the puzzle of how they'd arrived at this moment. On another level, he was simply a man trying to keep himself and his dog alive. And on a third level, he was acutely aware of the responsibility he carried. The knowledge that thousands of lives depended on his ability to maintain composure, to keep the scene secure, and to not do anything that might trigger the device. Scout remained pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence that grounded Marcus in the moment. The dog's breathing had slowed to a measured rhythm, his body language suggesting a state of alert readiness rather than panic. It was remarkable, Marcus thought, how well Scout could read the situation. The dog understood that they were in danger. The dog understood that they needed to wait. And the dog had somehow communicated to Marcus that panic was not an option. The timer on the device read, Alra 4217, and continued its relentless countdown. Outside the closet, the terminal had transformed into something resembling a controlled disaster scene. Marcus could hear the sounds of evacuation, the muffled announcements over the PA system, the hurried footsteps of thousands of people moving toward exits, the occasional shout of a security officer directing traffic, the normal ambient noise of an airport, the beeping of baggage carts, the chiming of the ticketing system, the low murmur of conversation, had been replaced by something more urgent, more primal. A TSA supervisor had positioned himself just outside the closet door, maintaining a perimeter and ensuring that no unauthorized personnel approached. His name was Agent Chen, according to his name tag, and he'd been briefed on the situation. He understood what was at stake. He understood that this closet was now the most dangerous location in the entire airport. Bomb Squad ETA is now 6 minutes. Agent Chen called out, his voice steady and professional. They're coming in hot. All other areas of the terminal are being cleared. We're establishing a 200-meter evacuation radius around this location. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the information. 200 meters. That was standard protocol for an active explosive device. It was designed to minimize casualties if detonation occurred. But Marcus knew the mathematics. A device with this much apparent sophistication could have a blast radius far exceeding 200 meters. If it detonated, the damage would be catastrophic regardless of evacuation efforts. But he didn't voice these thoughts. Panic was contagious, and Marcus had learned long ago that the best way to maintain control of a situation was to project calm, even when you felt anything but calm. The unconscious man groaned again, his body twitching slightly. His condition seemed to be deteriorating. His breathing had become even more shallow, and his skin had taken on an even more pronounced grayish tone. Marcus was increasingly convinced that he'd been exposed to some kind of chemical agent. Possibly something related to the drug shipment, possibly something else entirely. Marcus carefully moved closer to the man, keeping one hand on Scout to ensure the dog stayed calm. He checked the man's pulse again. Still weak, still irregular, but still present. The man's pupils were pinpoint-sized, which suggested opioid exposure. But the grayish skin tone and the respiratory depression suggested something more. Something more toxic, more dangerous. We need medical personnel in here, Marcus called out to Agent Chen. The unconscious male's condition is deteriorating. Possible opioid overdose, possibly combined with some other chemical exposure. He's not going to make it if we don't get him treatment soon. Agent Chen's expression tightened. Medical personnel are standing by, but they can't enter the perimeter until we're sure the device is secure. Bomb squad will make that determination when they arrive. Marcus understood. It was protocol. It was the right decision, even if it was a heartbreaking one. A man's life might depend on medical intervention, but the lives of thousands of people depended on maintaining scene security. The calculus of triage demanded that the greater good take precedence over the individual. But it didn't make it any easier to watch a man slowly slip away. Scout whined softly, as if responding to the despair that Marcus was trying so hard to keep buried. The dog pressed more firmly against Marcus's leg, and Marcus understood that Scout was doing what dogs do best. Providing comfort, providing presence, providing a connection to something beyond the immediate crisis. "I know, buddy," Marcus whispered, reaching down to scratch behind Scout's ears. "I know." The timer read 0:43, 40 minutes. 40 minutes until either the bomb squad disarmed the device or the device detonated. 40 minutes that felt like they were stretching into infinity. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. The unconscious man, David, according to his name tag, was an airport maintenance worker. That meant he had access to maintenance areas throughout the terminal. That meant he could move through the airport without drawing attention. That meant he could have placed this device anywhere in the terminal. Unless he hadn't placed it at all. Unless he'd discovered it and been exposed to something that rendered him unconscious. Unless he was a victim, not a perpetrator. The drug packages suggested a smuggling operation. Large quantities of high-value narcotics being moved through the airport. But the bomb suggested something far more sinister. A bomb in an airport wasn't about profit. A bomb in an airport was about sending a message. A bomb in an airport was about terror. Unless the bomb was a fail-safe. Unless someone had built it specifically to destroy the drug shipment if it was discovered. Unless the bomb was designed to eliminate evidence and witnesses simultaneously. The possibilities kept multiplying, each one more disturbing than the last. Marcus's phone buzzed. Another text from Captain Rodriguez. "Media is already getting wind of this. We're going to have helicopters overhead within the hour. Prepare yourself for a circus. But you're doing good work down there. Keep it together." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't have the mental energy to compose a message. All of his focus was on the moment, on maintaining scene security, on keeping Scout calm, on waiting for the bomb squad to arrive. The timer read 00:38:45. 38 minutes. Agent Chen spoke again. "Bomb squad is now 4 minutes out. They're requesting a preliminary assessment of the device. Can you provide dimensions, apparent composition, and any visible triggering mechanisms?" Marcus looked at the device more carefully, trying to gather information without getting too close. The explosive material itself appeared to be some kind of putty-like substance, packed into a rectangular container roughly the size of a shoebox. The wiring was complex. Far more complex than anything Marcus would have expected from an amateur bomb maker. This was the work of someone with training, someone with expertise, someone who knew what they were doing. Dimensions approximately 18 by 12 by 8 inches, Marcus reported, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Composition appears to be putty-like explosive material, possibly C4 or similar military-grade explosive. Wiring is complex, multiple circuits, color-coded, suggesting professional construction. Timer is digital, red LED display, currently showing 38 minutes, 41 seconds, and counting down. I can see what appears to be a pressure sensor beneath the device, and possibly motion sensors integrated into the wiring. There was a pause as Agent Chen relayed this information to the bomb squad. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a new tone, one of increased urgency. Bomb squad confirms that this matches the profile of a sophisticated device. They're upgrading to highest priority response. ETA is now 3 minutes. They're requesting that you maintain position, but not attempt any interaction with the device whatsoever. Understood, Marcus said. No interaction, just maintaining position and scene security. The timer read 0:37 to 12, 37 minutes. Marcus could hear the sound of sirens now, much closer than before. Multiple sirens converging on the airport from different directions. The bomb squad was coming. The cavalry was arriving. And Marcus understood that the next few minutes would be critical. Once the bomb squad arrived, they would take over the scene. They would make the assessment, attempt the disarming, and either succeed or fail. And there was nothing Marcus could do to influence the outcome. All he could do was wait. Scout shifted his weight slightly, moving from one paw to the other. The dog was managing his stress in the way dogs do, through small, controlled movements, through the maintenance of physical contact with his handler, through the simple act of being present. Marcus envied that ability. He wished he could manage his own stress so gracefully. The unconscious man's breathing had become even more shallow. Marcus could barely see his chest rising and falling. The man's skin had taken on a waxy quality, as if life was slowly draining from him. There was nothing Marcus could do. He was trapped in this closet with a dying man, an explosive device, and his dog, and he was powerless to change any of it. Except that wasn't entirely true. Marcus could have called for medical personnel. He could have insisted that they enter the perimeter and attempt to save the man's life. But doing so would compromise scene security. It would risk the lives of the paramedics. It would potentially trigger the device. So Marcus did nothing. He stood in the closet, his hand on Scout's head, and he watched a man slowly slip away. The timer read 00:35, 48, 35 minutes. The sirens were very close now. Marcus could hear the sound of vehicles pulling up outside the terminal, the sound of doors opening, the sound of equipment being unloaded. The bomb squad was here. The professionals were taking over. And Marcus understood that his role was about to change. He was no longer the primary responder. He was no longer the detective in charge. He was now a witness, a source of information, a person who would be debriefed and questioned and analyzed by people with far more expertise than he possessed. But before any of that happened, there was still the matter of the device. There was still the countdown. There were still 35 minutes before either success or catastrophe. Agent Chen spoke again. Bomb Squad is establishing their equipment station. They're requesting that you remain in position until they've completed their preliminary assessment. They'll be approaching the closet in approximately 2 minutes. Understood, Marcus said. We'll be here. Scout whined softly again, and Marcus realized that the dog was picking up on his anxiety. Dogs were remarkably perceptive. They could read human emotions with an accuracy that sometimes bordered on the supernatural. Scout could sense that Marcus was afraid, that Marcus was uncertain, that Marcus was struggling to maintain his composure. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, more to himself than to Scout. "It's going to be okay. The professionals are here. They know what they're doing. We just have to trust them." But even as he said the words, Marcus wasn't entirely sure he believed them. He'd learned to trust Scout's instincts. But could he trust the bomb squad's expertise? Could he trust that they would be able to disarm the device in time? Could he trust that everything would work out? The timer read 33:20. 33 minutes. Two figures in heavy protective gear appeared at the closet entrance. The bomb squad technicians, dressed in their full EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, suits. The suits were bulky and cumbersome, designed to protect the wearer from fragmentation and blast effects. They made the technicians look almost inhuman, like astronauts preparing for a mission to another planet. "Detective," one of the technicians said, his voice muffled slightly by the suit's communication system. "I'm Sergeant Williams with the bomb squad. This is Technician Rodriguez. We're going to need you to exit the closet so we can begin our assessment." Marcus nodded and began to move toward the door, keeping Scout close to his side. As he passed the technicians, he caught a glimpse of their faces through the suit visors. Both men looked calm and focused, their expressions suggesting a level of professional detachment that came from years of experience. "The device is in the back corner," Marcus said, pointing. "Pressure sensor underneath, possible motion sensors integrated into the wiring. The unconscious male is in the opposite corner. Possible opioid overdose combined with chemical exposure. His condition is deteriorating." "We'll handle it," Sergeant Williams said. "You get yourself and your dog to a safe location. Agent Chen will debrief you once we've secured the scene." Marcus exited the closet, Scout following close behind. The moment they stepped out into the terminal, Marcus felt the weight of the situation crash down on him even more heavily. The closet had been a contained space, a place where he could focus on the immediate situation. But out here, surrounded by security personnel and bomb squad technicians and the general chaos of an active emergency response, the full scope of what was happening became impossible to ignore. This was real. This was happening. And the outcome was still uncertain. Agent Chen guided Marcus and Scout to a secure holding area approximately 50 meters from the closet. Other security personnel were present, along with a few paramedics who were standing by with medical equipment. The area had been cordoned off, creating a secondary perimeter within the larger evacuation zone. "You did good work," Agent Chen said, his voice genuinely respectful. "Your dog found something that could have killed thousands of people. You both should be proud." Marcus nodded, but he didn't feel proud. He felt exhausted. He felt terrified. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. Scout, sensing Marcus's emotional state, pressed against his leg and let out a soft whine. The dog was offering comfort in the only way he knew how, through presence, through connection, through the simple act of being there. And Marcus realized, in that moment, that Scout had been right all along. Not just about the device, but about trust, about faith, about the power of believing in someone, or in this case, something, even when everything seemed impossible. The timer on the device, still visible through the open closet door, read 0031:05. 31 minutes. 31 minutes for the bomb squad to work their magic. 31 minutes for years of training and expertise to be put to the test. 31 minutes for everything to either go right or go catastrophically wrong. And all Marcus could do was wait. The bomb squad technicians worked with a kind of methodical precision that only came from hundreds of hours of training and dozens of successful operations. Sergeant Williams and Technician Rodriguez moved through the maintenance closet like surgeons in an operating room. Each movement calculated, each decision made with the weight of thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Marcus watched from his secure holding area, unable to look away despite the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm him. Scout remained pressed against his leg, the dog's presence the only thing keeping Marcus grounded in the moment. Every muscle in Marcus's body was tense, coiled like a spring, ready to react to whatever might happen next. The timer on the device read 002947 and continued its relentless countdown. Through the open closet door, Marcus could see Sergeant Williams positioning himself beside the device, his gloved hands moving with practiced care. The EOD suit's heavy protective gear made every movement seem slow and deliberate. But there was nothing hesitant about the technician's actions. This was a man who had done this before. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Technician Rodriguez was working on the other side of the device, his focus absolute. He had a portable X-ray machine set up, creating a detailed image of the device's internal structure. The image appeared on a small monitor that Rodriguez was studying intently. His head tilted slightly as he processed the information. "We've got a visual on the internal components." Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system, audible even to Marcus from his distance. "Looks like a standard military-grade C4 configuration with a digital timer as the primary detonation trigger. There's a secondary circuit here, pressure sensitive, as Detective Morrison indicated. And, yes, there's a tertiary circuit integrated into the motion sensors. This is a sophisticated device, multiple fail-safes." Marcus's heart sank. Multiple fail-safes meant that disarming the device would be exponentially more difficult. It meant that cutting the wrong wire could trigger detonation. It meant that any mistake, no matter how small, could result in catastrophe. "How long to disarm?" A voice came through the communication system. This was Captain Rodriguez, who had arrived at the scene and was now coordinating the overall response from a mobile command center set up in the terminal. There was a pause, a long pause. The kind of pause that suggested Sergeant Williams was carefully considering his response, weighing the risks, calculating the probabilities. "Minimum of 20 minutes, Williams finally said. "Possibly longer. The device is more sophisticated than standard military ordnance. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. We're looking at someone with professional training, possibly military background, possibly a bomb-making specialist." 20 minutes. The timer currently showed 00:12. 20 minutes would put them at 00:09 at R12, cutting it dangerously close. If anything went wrong, if there were any complications, if the disarming process took longer than anticipated, they would be looking at detonation with minimal time to evacuate or take shelter. But there was no alternative. The device had to be disarmed. There was no way to safely move it, no way to safely contain it, no way to do anything other than attempt to disable it in place. "Understood," Captain Rodriguez said. "Proceed with caution. All personnel maintain current positions. Medical teams remain on standby." Marcus watched as Williams began the delicate process of analyzing the device's wiring. He had a small handheld device that looked like a modified multimeter, using it to test various points in the circuit. Each test was performed with extreme care. The technician's movements slow and deliberate, his attention never wavering from the task at hand. Scout shifted slightly, his weight moving from one paw to the other. The dog was managing his stress, but Marcus could sense the underlying tension in Scout's body. The dog understood, on some level, that they were still in danger, that the threat hadn't been neutralized, that everything was still uncertain. "I need to get closer," Williams said, his voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the task. "Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to maintain the X-ray feed. If anything changes, if you see any movement in the internal components, you alert me immediately." "Understood," Rodriguez replied. X-ray feed is continuous. I've got visual on all internal components. Proceeding with caution. Williams moved even closer to the device, his gloved hands now working with instruments that looked almost impossibly delicate. He had a small set of tools, precision instruments designed specifically for bomb disarming work. A wire stripper, a multimeter, a small magnifying lens, various probes and testing devices. Each tool was used with a kind of care that suggested years of experience, years of training, years of understanding the consequences of even the smallest mistake. The timer read 0 to 27:33. 27 minutes remaining. Marcus found himself holding his breath. He forced himself to exhale, forced himself to breathe normally, forced himself to maintain some semblance of composure. But it was difficult. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Every second brought them closer to either success or catastrophe. The unconscious man, David, remained motionless in the corner of the closet. His breathing had become even more shallow, almost imperceptible. Marcus had watched the man's condition deteriorate over the past several minutes, and he understood that David was running out of time. Even if the device was successfully disarmed, even if the bomb squad managed to prevent catastrophe, David might not survive. But there was nothing Marcus could do about that. His focus had to remain on the device, on the countdown, on the possibility that everything could still go wrong. "I've got the primary timer circuit isolated," Williams said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone. One of increased focus, increased intensity. "Rodriguez, I'm seeing some unusual configuration in the secondary failsafe. Can you get me a better angle on the internal wiring?" There was a pause as Rodriguez adjusted the X-ray machine. The image on the monitor shifted, providing a clearer view of the device's internal structure. "I see it," Rodriguez said. That's not standard military configuration. That's custom work. Whoever built this device took components from multiple sources and integrated them into a unique fail-safe system. If you cut the wrong wire, the secondary circuit will complete and trigger the primary detonator. The implications of what Rodriguez was saying hung in the air like a physical weight. This wasn't just a sophisticated device. This was a device designed by someone with extensive knowledge of explosives and electronics. This was a device that had been built specifically to be difficult to disarm. This was a device that had multiple layers of protection designed to prevent exactly what the bomb squad was trying to do. "Can you identify the correct wire?" Williams asked, his voice still steady but with an underlying current of tension. "Working on it," Rodriguez replied. "The configuration is unique. I'm going to need to trace the circuit manually. This is going to take time." Time. That was the one thing they didn't have. The timer read 25:18, 25 minutes. Marcus felt his anxiety rising. He could feel his heart rate accelerating, could feel his palms beginning to sweat. Scout pressed more firmly against his leg, as if the dog understood that his handler was beginning to lose his composure and was attempting to provide additional grounding. "Come on," Marcus whispered, not sure if he was talking to the bomb squad technicians or to himself or to Scout. "Come on, you can do this." Agent Chen was standing nearby, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language betraying his own anxiety. The man was a professional, trained to handle high-stress situations, but even he was struggling with the weight of what was happening. "They know what they're doing," Agent Chen said quietly, perhaps more for his own reassurance than for Marcus's. "Williams has disarmed 47 devices in his career. He's one of the best in the country. If anyone can do this, it's him." Marcus nodded, accepting the reassurance, even though he wasn't entirely convinced by it. 47 devices was impressive, but this device was different. This device had been built by someone with professional expertise. This device had been designed to be difficult to disarm. In the closet, Williams was now working with a magnifying lens, examining the wiring with intense focus. His movements were incredibly slow, incredibly deliberate. Each wire was traced carefully, each connection analyzed, each potential trigger point identified and cataloged. "I'm seeing the pattern now," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a tone of cautious optimism. "The secondary failsafe is connected to the primary timer through a relay circuit. If the timer reaches 0, it triggers detonation. But if anyone attempts to cut the timer circuit directly, the secondary failsafe completes and also triggers detonation. It's a no-win scenario unless we can identify and disable the secondary circuit first." "Can you trace it?" Williams asked. "I'm trying," Rodriguez replied. "The wiring is deliberately obfuscated. The builder used color coding that doesn't follow standard conventions. Red isn't positive, black isn't negative. They've inverted the entire system to make it more difficult to trace." The timer read, "Eder 2301, 23 minutes. Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a bomb. This was a puzzle. A deadly puzzle designed by someone who understood explosives and electronics and the psychology of bomb disarming. Someone who had anticipated that professionals would attempt to disarm the device and had built in protections against that possibility. "I've got it," Rodriguez said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of cautious triumph. "I've identified the secondary failsafe circuit. It's connected through a series of relays, but the primary trigger point is here. This junction where the secondary circuit connects to the main power supply. If we can isolate this connection without completing the circuit, we can disable the failsafe." "Can it be done without triggering the device?" Williams asked. "Possibly," Rodriguez replied. "But it's going to require precise work. One slip, one miscalculation, and we're looking at detonation." "Understood," Williams said. "I'm going to need you to guide me through this step by step. Every wire, every connection, every possible failure point. I need to understand the complete circuit before I make any moves." For the next several minutes, Rodriguez walked Williams through the device's wiring with meticulous detail. The conversation was technical, filled with terminology that Marcus didn't entirely understand. But the underlying meaning was clear. They were attempting to navigate an incredibly complex circuit, identifying the precise point where they could interrupt the secondary failsafe without triggering the device. The timer read, 002012, 20 minutes. They were approaching the critical window. If the disarming process took much longer, they would be cutting it dangerously close to the timer's final countdown. "Okay," Williams said finally. "I understand the circuit. I'm going to begin the disarming sequence. Rodriguez, maintain constant visual on the internal components. If you see any movement, any change in the circuit, you alert me immediately." "Understood," Rodriguez said. Proceeding with caution, Williams positioned himself even closer to the device, his hands now moving with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. He had a small probe in one hand and a delicate cutting tool in the other. His focus was absolute, his concentration unwavering. Marcus found himself holding his breath again. Scout had gone completely still, as if the dog understood that this was the critical moment, the point of no return, the instant where everything could change. Williams made the first cut. A small wire, barely thicker than a human hair, was severed with surgical precision. The probe in his other hand remained in contact with the circuit, monitoring for any change in electrical flow. Nothing happened. Secondary failsafe circuit is still complete, Rodriguez reported. No change in electrical flow. Proceeding. Williams made the second cut, then the third, then the fourth. Each cut was made with the same meticulous precision, each one carefully calculated to interrupt the secondary failsafe without triggering the primary detonator. Marcus was barely breathing now, his entire being focused on the scene unfolding in the closet. The timer read R0017045, 17 minutes remaining. Okay, Williams said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, one of cautious optimism mixed with continued concentration. I've isolated the secondary failsafe circuit. It's now disconnected from the primary power supply. The device should no longer have the ability to trigger detonation through the secondary circuit. Confirmed, Rodriguez said. I'm reading no electrical flow through the secondary circuit. The failsafe is disabled. A collective breath seemed to be released throughout the terminal. Marcus felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders, though he understood that the danger wasn't entirely past. There was still the primary timer circuit to address. There was still the possibility of failure. Now for the hard part, Williams said. I need to disable the primary timer without triggering the main detonator. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to guide me through the timer circuit. Every connection, every possibility for failure. For the next several minutes, the process repeated. Rodriguez provided detailed guidance on the timer circuit's configuration. Williams carefully analyzed each connection, each wire, each potential failure point. The timer read 00.1530, 15 minutes. I've identified the timer's power supply connection, Williams said. If I can interrupt the power supply without completing any alternative circuits, the timer will stop. The device will be rendered inert. Proceed, Rodriguez said. I've got visual on all internal components. No alternative circuits detected. The power supply interruption should be safe. Williams positioned his cutting tool over a specific wire, the power supply wire that was feeding the digital timer. His hand was steady, his focus absolute. This was the moment. This was the point where the device would either be disarmed or would detonate. He made the cut. The digital display on the timer flickered once, then went dark. The countdown stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence in the terminal. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone seemed to be holding their collective breath, waiting to see if the device would respond, waiting to see if there were any hidden fail-safes, waiting to see if they had actually succeeded or if they had just triggered a delayed detonation sequence. Then Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system, and it was filled with relief and triumph. Device is inert. All circuits are dead. The explosive material is no longer connected to any detonation mechanism. We have successfully disarmed the device. A cheer erupted throughout the terminal. Not loud, not disrespectful, but genuine relief and celebration. The immediate threat had been neutralized. The catastrophe had been prevented. Thousands of lives had been saved. Marcus felt his knees go weak. He sat down heavily on a nearby bench, Scout immediately moving to press against his side. The dog was whining softly, as if expressing his own relief, his own understanding that the danger had passed. You did it, Agent Chen said, his voice filled with genuine respect. Your dog did it. Scout found the device, and the bomb squad disarmed it. You both saved thousands of lives today. Marcus nodded, but he couldn't speak. The emotions were too overwhelming. Relief, exhaustion, the fading adrenaline, the realization of what could have happened if Scout hadn't alerted, If Marcus hadn't trusted his dog's instincts, if everything hadn't aligned perfectly in those critical moments. Scout pressed his head against Marcus's chest, and Marcus wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him close. This was his partner. This was the dog that had been doubted, that had been questioned, that had nearly been destroyed by a single mistake. And this was the same dog that had just saved thousands of lives. The timer that had been counting down, (0:14:23 when Williams made the final cut, would never reach 0. The catastrophe had been prevented, and Scout, the K-9 unit that had been marked for potential dismissal, had proven himself to be exactly what Marcus had always believed him to be. A hero,